When she finished her song, he walked closer. The crowd started to move away, leaving the two of them standing face to face again. Lily looked up and recognized him immediately. Her eyes widened slightly, but she stayed calm. "You came back," she said softly. He nodded. "I did." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the city surrounded them, but between them it felt strangely quiet. "You play very well," he said finally. "That song yesterday, I can't get it out of my head." Lily smiled shyly. "It's called Mama's Song," she said. "It's the only one I know that really feels like her." Charles didn't know what to say. He looked at her violin and then at her small box with a few coins inside. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. "My mom taught me," she said. "She used to play too. But she got sick and now, it's just me." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears didn't change much. Charles felt something twist in his chest. He cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. "How old are you?" 10, she replied. "Almost 11. He looked at her again, this tiny girl who stood so bravely in a world that had given her nothing. For some reason, he felt small standing in front of her. "You said yesterday you'd adopt me if my song moved you," she said suddenly, her tone innocent but honest. "Did it?" The question hit him like a wave. He didn't expect her to bring it up. He looked around, embarrassed, realizing a few people nearby had overheard. I said that as a joke," he admitted. "I didn't mean to hurt your feelings." She nodded slowly, looking down at her violin. "It didn't hurt me," she said quietly. "People say things all the time they don't mean, but sometimes words can still be heavy." Charles didn't know what to say. Her words, though simple, cut straight through him. He wanted to say something kind, something to make up for his carelessness, but the right words wouldn't come. Before he could speak, a voice from behind shouted, "Hey, Lily! The soup kitchen's open early today?" It was an older woman from the shelter waving to her. Lily turned back to Charles and gave a polite smile. "I have to go," she said softly. "Thank you for listening again." She picked up her violin case and walked off, her step small but full of quiet strength. Charles stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd once more. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his spacious apartment. Everything around him was perfect, clean, expensive, silent. But it all felt empty. The sound of her violin kept echoing in his head, and so did her words. Sometimes words can still be heavy. He thought about his own life, about how long it had been since he'd felt proud of something that wasn't tied to money. He remembered when he was a boy, sitting in a small music class playing piano for the first time. He used to love it. But as he grew older, success took over and the music faded away. He got up, walked to the window, and looked down at the city. Somewhere out there, that little girl was sleeping in a shelter, with nothing but a violin and memories of her mother. And still, she managed to create something so beautiful that it shook him to his core. The next morning, before heading to work, Charles made a decision. He stopped by a local music shop and bought a new violin, small, polished, and shining under the light. The shopkeeper wrapped it carefully in a soft case. Later that afternoon, he returned to the square. But Lily wasn't there. Her usual corner was empty. He waited for a while, looking around, hoping she would appear. Hours passed, and still, there was no sign of her. Just as he was about to leave, the old woman from the shelter walked by. Charles recognized her from the day before. He approached her politely. "Excuse me," he said. "The little girl who plays the violin, Lillian, do you know where I can find her?" The woman looked at him suspiciously for a moment, then softened when she saw the instrument in his hand. "She's at the community center today," she said. "They have music lessons for kids once a week. She goes there when she can." Charles nodded, thanked her, and followed her directions. When he arrived, he saw a group of children sitting on old chairs holding small instruments. In the back of the room, Lily was there, her violin resting on her shoulder, her face glowing as she played. The teacher clapped softly as the class ended. When Lily turned and saw Charles standing by the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "You came again," she said, walking up to him. "I did," he said, smiling slightly. "And I brought you something." He handed her the violin case. Her hands trembled as she opened it. When she saw the beautiful new instrument inside, her eyes filled with tears. "For me?" she whispered. "Yes," he said gently. "You deserve it." She hugged the case tightly, then looked up at him. "Thank you," she said with a voice so sincere it almost broke his heart. He smiled. Just promise me one thing, never stop playing. The world needs to hear your music, Lily nodded, smiling through her tears. I won't stop, she said. And one day I'll play for you again. Charles looked at her, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. As he walked out of the center that evening, the city lights began to glow again. Behind him he could hear the faint sound of Lily's violin, pure, beautiful, and full of life. And this time he didn't just hear it, he listened. Days turned into weeks and life slowly began to change for both Lily and Charles. For the first time in years, Charles found himself looking forward to something other than meetings or business deals. Every few days he would visit the community center, not as the powerful businessman everyone knew him to be, but simply as a man who wanted to listen. Each time, Lily greeted him with a smile. She would sit on her small chair, her new violin shining softly under the light, and she would play. Her music filled the room, soft, pure, and alive. Sometimes it was joyful, sometimes sad, but it always carried a truth that went beyond words. The more Charles listened, the more he began to feel something changing inside him. It was as if each note of her music was washing away the walls he had built around himself. He started remembering things from his own past, the smell of his mother's kitchen, the old piano in his childhood home, the laughter he used to share before life became about numbers and profits. One evening after her lesson, Lily noticed him sitting quietly by the window, lost in thought. Are you okay, sir? She asked softly. He blinked and smiled faintly. Yes, I'm fine. Just thinking about old memories. Good memories or sad ones? She asked. A bit of both, he admitted. Sometimes they're mixed together. Lily nodded as if she understood completely. That's how music is, she said. Happy and sad can live in the same song. Her words, simple as they were, struck him deeply. He realized how wise she was for someone so young, how much life had already taught her. After that day, Charles decided he wanted to do more than just listen. He met with the community center director and offered to fund the children's music program. He didn't make a big announcement, didn't want any attention. He just quietly made sure they had better instruments. New chairs and lessons twice a week instead of once. When Lily saw the changes, she was overjoyed. Did you do this? She asked him one afternoon, eyes wide. He smiled gently. Let's just say someone who believes in you did. She grinned, hugging her violin. Then tell that someone I'll make them proud. Charles laughed. A real, warm laugh, the kind he hadn't felt in years. In the weeks that followed, their bond grew stronger. Sometimes after her classes, they would sit on the bench outside the center and talk. Lily told him stories about her mother, how she used to sing lullabies and how they'd watch the sunset together before she got sick. She spoke with so much love that even the painful parts sounded beautiful. Charles, in return, told her small pieces of his life, about how he once dreamed of being a musician too, how his father pushed him toward business instead, and how he lost touch with music completely after becoming rich. You can still play again, Lily said one evening. It's never too late to start. He chuckled softly. Maybe you're right, he said. Maybe you can teach me someday. Her eyes lit up. I would love that. And so on quiet afternoons, that's exactly what they did. Lily would place a simple beginner's sheet in front of him and show him how to hold the violin. His hands were stiff, awkward at first, but she was patient, guiding him gently. The sight of a powerful businessman fumbling through the notes made her giggle, and he didn't mind at all. In those moments, he felt human again. Not just a name on an office door, but a person who could feel joy, connection, and peace. But outside their small world of music, things weren't always easy for Lily. The shelter she lived in was overcrowded, and some nights she had to give up her spot and sleep on a bench near the bus stop. She never told Charles about it. She didn't want to seem ungrateful. She just played her music and kept her smile. One rainy night, however, fate brought the truth out. Charles was driving home from a late meeting when he saw a small figure huddled under a bus shelter, clutching something close. He slowed down and recognized the familiar violin case. His heart sank. He pulled over and ran through the rain. Lily? She looked up, startled. Her face was pale and her hands were trembling from the cold. Oh, Mr. Donovan, she said softly. I didn't think you'd be here. He knelt beside her, trying to shield her from the rain with his coat. What are you doing out here? It's freezing. The shelter was full tonight, she said quietly. But it's okay. I've slept here before. I'll be fine. Something inside him broke at those words. No child should have to say that, I'll be fine, when they clearly weren't. Come with me, he said firmly. You're not staying here, she hesitated. But where will I go? To my home, he said. Just for tonight until we figure something out. She wanted to say no, but his tone was kind, not demanding. She nodded slowly, trusting him. He opened the car door and helped her in, wrapping her in a dry blanket from the back seat. She held her violin close the entire ride, afraid of losing it. When they reached his apartment, she looked around in awe. Everything was neat, warm, and glowing with soft lights. She stood near the doorway, afraid to touch anything. You can sit, Lily, he said gently. You're safe here. He brought her a bowl of hot soup and some dry clothes. His housekeeper had left some things from her granddaughter's last visit. Lily changed quietly, her small figure almost lost in the oversized sweater. After eating, she sat by the window, staring out at the rain. It's so quiet here, she whispered. Too quiet sometimes, he replied, taking a seat across from her. That's why I like your music. It makes everything feel alive again. She smiled faintly. My mom used to say music fills the spaces where words can't reach. He nodded. She was right. That night, he set up a small bed for her in the guest room. As he turned off the light, she whispered, Thank you, sir. Good night, Lily, he said softly. But when he went to his room, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how easily the world had forgotten children like her, talented, pure-hearted, yet forced to survive on so little. He decided then that he wouldn't let her slip back into the cold streets again. The next morning, he made a few calls. By afternoon, arrangements were in place. A better home for her at a nearby foster program connected to the community center. It wasn't charity. It was a chance for her to live like a child should, with warmth, care, and opportunity. When he told Lily, she looked unsure at first. I don't want to be a burden, she said. He shook his head gently. You're not a burden. You're a blessing. You've given me something I didn't even know I'd lost. She smiled, eyes shining. You mean music? He nodded. And peace. From that day forward, their bond deepened even more. He visited her often, attended her small recitals, and helped her find new teachers. Lily, in turn, began to grow into her music like never before. Her melodies became richer, her confidence stronger. One afternoon, she played a piece she had written herself, a gentle tune she called The Kind Stranger. When she finished, she looked up at him with a mischievous grin. It's about you, she said. He laughed softly, touched beyond words. Then it's the best song I've ever heard. As the months went by, Charles began noticing other changes in himself too. He smiled more, worried less, and even started playing piano again. His employees at work were surprised. The once strict and distant boss now greeted people with warmth and kindness. But he knew it wasn't magic or money that had changed him. It was a little girl with a violin and a heart big enough to remind him what really mattered. One evening, as they walked through the same city square where they had first met, Lily stopped and looked around. The fountain glowed under the streetlights and people passed by just as they had before. Do you remember this spot? She asked. He smiled. How could I forget? She giggled. This is where you made a joke about adopting me. He chuckled, a little embarrassed. Yes, and you proved me wrong that day. She looked up at him with a warm smile. Maybe you didn't adopt me, but you still gave me a home here, she said, placing her small hand over her heart. He felt his throat tighten. He looked at her, this small, brave soul who had walked into his life like a melody, and he knew she had changed him forever. As they stood there, the sound of distant music filled the air again. Lily lifted her violin and began to play softly, the same song from that first night. But this time it wasn't filled with sorrow. It was full of light, of gratitude, of love. Charles closed his eyes and listened. The world around them blurred, and for a moment, there was nothing but her music, the sound that had once broken his pride, and now had healed his heart. Months passed, and Lily's life slowly began to blossom like spring after a long winter. She was now living in a small but cozy foster home arranged through the community center. The place wasn't fancy, but it was safe, bright and filled with warmth. There were books on the shelves, clean sheets on the bed, and a little desk by the window where she kept her violin. Every morning, sunlight spilled across the room, touching the instrument that had changed her life. She would open the window, let the breeze in, and begin to play. The sound of her violin floated out into the streets, soft and clear. People walking by sometimes stopped to listen, smiling before continuing on their way. Charles visited her often. He had become a familiar face at the foster home, not as a businessman or benefactor, but as a friend. Every time he arrived, Lily would run to the door with a grin, holding her violin case. "I learned a new song," she would say excitedly, and he would always sit down and listen, giving her his full attention. Her teacher at the community center soon realized Lily's gift went far beyond ordinary talent. She had a natural connection with music, not just in how she played, but in how she felt every note. When she performed, people didn't just hear the sound. They felt the emotion. One afternoon, after a small recital, her teacher approached Charles and said, "She needs a real stage, a chance to show what she can do. There's a youth music competition next month. I think she's ready." Charles looked at Lily, who was standing nearby, polishing her violin. She looked up with hopeful eyes. "A competition?" she asked softly. "Yes," the teacher said with a smile. "And I think you could win." Lily hesitated. "I've never played in front of so many people before." Charles knelt beside her. "You've already played in front of strangers on the street, remember? You can do this. You just have to be yourself." She nodded slowly, her small hands gripping the violin case. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll try." From that day on, the community center became her second home. She practiced every day after school, her fingers growing faster, her sound clearer. Charles often stopped by after work to watch her practice. Sometimes he even joined in, fumbling through a few piano notes while she giggled at his mistakes. One evening, after a long practice session, Lily looked up at him and said, "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" Charles smiled softly. "She already is. Every time you play, she's right there with you, in your music." Lily's eyes glistened. She nodded, wiping a tear quickly before it could fall. "Then I'll play for her," she whispered. As the day of the competition drew closer, the entire community center buzzed with excitement. The other children cheered Lily on, and even the foster home staff came together to support her. Charles made sure she had a proper performance dress, simple but elegant, and a bow for her hair that matched her violin ribbon. The night before the competition, he stopped by to wish her luck. She was sitting by the window, polishing her violin like she always did. When she saw him, she smiled nervously. "What if I make a mistake?" she asked. "Then you keep playing," he said gently. "The best musicians aren't perfect, Lily, they're brave." She smiled at that. "Then I'll be brave." The next evening, the concert hall was filled with people. The lights were bright and the sound of chatter filled the air. Dozens of young performers waited backstage, clutching their instruments. Lily sat quietly in a corner, her small hands trembling slightly. Charles was in the audience, sitting near the front row. He had never felt so nervous in his life, not even during his biggest business presentations. When Lily walked onto the stage, his heart pounded. She looked tiny under the bright lights, her dress fluttering slightly as she walked to the center. For a moment, she froze. The audience seemed huge, and the silence felt heavy. Then she saw him, sitting there, smiling proudly. Their eyes met, and suddenly the fear melted away. She lifted her violin and began to play. The first notes were soft, trembling slightly, but then the melody grew stronger. The hall filled with sound, warm, full, and alive. It was a song she had written herself, one she called "For My Mother." It carried everything she felt, the sadness of loss, the beauty of memory, and the hope of a new beginning. People in the audience leaned forward, drawn in by her music. Some wiped their eyes without even realizing it. Charles sat perfectly still, his chest tight with emotion. He had heard her play many times before, but never like this. This was not the little girl from the street anymore. This was an artist telling her story through sound. When the final note faded, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, long, loud, and full of feeling. People stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. Lily bowed shyly, tears in her eyes. Backstage after the show, the judges announced the results. Lily had won first place. The crowd cheered again, and she was handed a small gold trophy. Her hands shook as she held it. Charles came up behind her, smiling proudly. "You did it," he said softly. She turned and hugged him tightly. "We did it," she whispered. "Because you believed in me." That night, her story spread quickly. Someone from the local newspaper wrote an article about her. From street corners to concert halls, the girl whose music changed hearts. Photos of her with her violin and the headline about the mysterious businessman who helped her began to circulate online. Charles didn't like the attention much, but he couldn't stop smiling when he saw her picture in print. He kept a copy of that newspaper on his desk, not as a reminder of fame, but as a symbol of something real: kindness, courage, and the power of second chances. In the following months, more doors opened for Lily. A small music foundation offered her a scholarship. She began attending lessons at a proper music school, surrounded by other young musicians. Charles made sure she had everything she needed, but more than that. He gave her something money couldn't buy: confidence. Every week, they still met at the community center, even when she didn't need lessons there anymore. It was their place, where everything had started. Sometimes they didn't even play. They just talked. One afternoon, Lily asked him a question that caught him off guard.
Do you ever miss your old life?
He looked at her curiously. What do you mean? You know, she said before all this, when you were just busy and serious all the time. He chuckled softly. No, I don't miss it at all. That life was full, but it wasn't happy. You reminded me what happiness feels like, she smiled. Then I'm glad I played that song that day. He looked at her, and for a moment words escaped him. All he could do was nod. As the months turned into a year, their story continued to inspire people. News outlets called it the Melody of Hope. They were invited to charity events and community programs. Lily performed to raise funds for children like her, and Charles spoke about the importance of giving chances instead of charity. But behind all the attention, their bond stayed simple, built on trust, kindness, and music. One rainy evening, just like the night they first met, Charles found himself walking past the same city square. The fountain still stood there, water glistening under the streetlights. He stopped for a moment, smiling at the memory of that tiny girl with the scratched violin. He didn't notice Lily walking up behind him until she spoke. It feels smaller now, doesn't it? He turned and laughed softly. It does. She held her violin case tightly and looked around. But it's where everything began. I'll never forget it. Neither will I, he said. She smiled up at him. Do you think my music really changed your life? He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said quietly. You did. Lily blushed, looking down at her shoes. Then I guess we changed each other. The rain began to fall gently, and without saying a word, she opened her violin case. Standing under the soft drizzle, she began to play, a calm, beautiful tune that seemed to blend with the rain. People passing by slowed down to listen, umbrellas pausing mid-step. Charles stood beside her, hands in his pockets, watching with quiet pride. The melody rose and fell, soft and steady, a song that spoke of beginnings and gratitude. When she finished, she looked up at him with a shy grin. That one's called Second Chances. He smiled, eyes warm. It's perfect. And in that moment, under the glow of the city lights and the sound of her music, the world felt right again. Not because of money or fame, but because two souls had found each other through a simple song. Years passed quietly, like pages turning in a well-loved book. The city changed. Buildings grew taller and new faces filled the streets, but some memories stayed the same. For Lily, the sound of her violin remained the heartbeat of her life, a reminder of where she had come from and how far she had gone. She was no longer the small girl who played in the cold for a few coins. Now she stood on grand stages. Beneath bright lights, her name printed on posters and programs. People traveled from faraway places just to hear her perform. Her music carried emotion that words could never express. Warmth, pain, love, hope, all wrapped inside every note. But despite the applause and fame, Lily never forgot who she was or where she came from. Every time she stepped on stage, she thought of that night long ago, when a man had stopped in the rain, listened to her song, and changed her life forever. Charles had stayed by her side through all the milestones. He was there when she got her first scholarship, when she released her first recording, and when she played at her first international concert. Though he never liked being in the spotlight, everyone in Lily's life knew who he was, not as a businessman, but as the person who had believed in her before anyone else did. Over time, Charles began to slow down a little. His hair had turned silver, and he preferred quiet mornings with coffee and soft piano music instead of long business meetings. But he was content. He had built more than wealth, and he had built meaning. One morning, as he sat on the balcony reading the newspaper, he saw an announcement that made his heart swell with pride. It read, "World-famous violinist returns home for charity concert. Proceeds to help homeless children." The photo beneath it showed Lily, smiling softly, holding her violin. Her eyes still had that same spark, gentle yet strong. When she visited him later that day, she carried that same newspaper clipping. "I wanted to tell you in person," she said, her voice full of excitement. "The concert's next month. I'm calling it the melody that started it all. I want it to be in the same city square, the one where we met." Charles smiled slowly. "The fountain, the lights, everything?" She nodded. "Exactly. I want people to remember that beauty can start from anywhere, even a cold street corner." He looked at her for a moment, unable to speak. Then he simply said, "You've turned your story into something beautiful, Lily." She reached over and took his hand. "You helped me find the music in it." In the weeks that followed, the city buzzed with anticipation. Posters went up everywhere. People who remembered the little girl who once played by the fountain couldn't believe she was returning as an international artist. The concert tickets sold out within hours, and the local news covered the story with pride. On the night of the concert, the square looked magical. String lights hung from every post, and the fountain sparkled under the warm glow. A large stage stood where Lily once stood years ago with her scratched violin. The difference now was stunning, but to her the feeling was the same. Backstage, she adjusted the ribbon on her violin case, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and nostalgia. She looked out at the crowd, thousands of people filling the square, waiting in silence. And right in the front row sat Charles, wearing the same calm smile he always did when she was about to perform. The lights dimmed, and the host stepped forward to introduce her. "Tonight," he said, "we welcome home a true inspiration. A girl whose music began right here among us and whose story reminds us that kindness can change a life. Please welcome Lily." The crowd erupted into applause. Lily took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The sound of clapping surrounded her, but her eyes searched for only one person. When she found Charles, her heart steadied. She lifted her violin and began to play. The song she chose wasn't one of her famous pieces. It was the same simple melody she had played the night she met him. But this time it sounded fuller, richer, touched by years of growth and love. The notes danced through the air, wrapping around the crowd like a soft embrace. As she played, memories filled her mind. The rain, the sound of coins dropping, his voice asking her to play again, and that first spark of hope. She poured all of it into the music, letting it speak what words never could. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence, the same kind of silence that used to follow her best performances. Then the applause came, thunderous and endless. People cheered, waved, and even cried. But Lily didn't look at the crowd. Her eyes were still on Charles. He stood up slowly, clapping, his eyes glistening. For a brief moment their gazes locked, and she felt as though time had stopped. Just like that first night under the rain. After the concert, reporters surrounded her, photographers snapping pictures, fans reaching out to shake her hand. But Lily politely smiled and said she needed a moment. She walked off the stage and went straight to where Charles was standing. "You played beautifully," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled. "I played for you." He shook his head. "No, Lily, you played for the world, and they finally heard you." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you for hearing me first." Later that evening, when most people had left and the lights around the square began to fade, Lily returned to the fountain. She placed her violin on the edge and looked at the water reflecting the stars. Charles joined her a few moments later, walking slowly with his hands in his pockets. "Still feels like magic, doesn't it?" he said. She nodded. "It does. It always will." For a while they stood there in silence, listening to the sound of the fountain and the distant laughter of people leaving the concert. Then Lily said softly, "I'm going to start a foundation. For kids like me. Music gave me a voice. I want to give others the same chance." Charles smiled proudly. "That's a wonderful idea. What will you call it?" She looked at him, her eyes bright. "The Second Chance Foundation," he chuckled. "Perfect." From that night on, the foundation grew quickly. Children from all over the city, some homeless, some struggling, came to learn music for free. Lily taught them herself whenever she could, reminding each one that talent isn't about luck or money but about heart. Charles helped manage the foundation's finances and mentored the volunteers. It became their shared mission, to keep giving hope where others had forgotten to look. Years went by, and Lily's fame continued to grow, but her humility never faded. She still visited the community center, still played for the children, and still spent quiet evenings talking with Charles about life, dreams in the past. Then one summer evening, during a special anniversary concert for the foundation, Lily stood before a large audience filled with young musicians. Before starting her performance, she took the microphone. "I want to tell you all something," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "Years ago, I was just a little girl with a broken violin. I didn't have a home or food or even hope. But one person stopped, listened, and believed in me. Because of that moment, I'm standing here today. So when you play, remember, your music can change someone's life just like mine was changed." She turned to where Charles was sitting and smiled. The crowd followed her gaze, giving him a round of applause. He looked slightly embarrassed but deeply touched. That night, Lily performed one of her newest compositions on For the One Who Listened. It was filled with gratitude, love, and peace, and as the final note faded, she looked out into the audience, her heart full. Years later, when Charles passed away peacefully in his sleep, the world mourned the loss of a man known for his kindness. At his memorial, Lily played his favorite melody, the same one that had connected their lives. Her tears fell freely, but her music remained steady, pure, and full of love. She later built a small music hall in his name at the foundation, called Harmony Hall. Inside it, there was a plaque that read, "Dedicated to the man who listened. May his kindness echo forever." Every year, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Lily returned to the fountain. She played softly under the streetlights just as she had that rainy night. Sometimes passers-by stopped to listen, not knowing the story behind the melody. But for Lily, it was more than music. It was a conversation between two souls that would never fade. And as the notes rose into the night, it felt as though the city itself was listening, remembering the little girl who played for hope and the man who stopped to listen. Because sometimes, one small act of kindness doesn't just change a life, it creates a legacy.